Je vais demander aux députés, s'il vous plaît, de garder la silence. La députée de Manicouagan puisse continuer ses commentaires. Je vais inviter la députée de recommencer au début.
Mr. Speaker, I rise with a heavy heart, but with great admiration and gratitude. I rise with a heavy heart, then, to pay tribute to Alexander Mackenzie, who left us on May 11th. The North Coast is mourning this man who left behind a remarkable legacy. He founded Shefferville's Airport Company, as well as the Chouetin Railroad, the first Indigenous-held railway in Quebec. He also created the Chakapesh Institute, which was a steward of the Inuit language and Inuitun culture. He was formerly chief of the Matamikush Lake John community. He was recognized in 2023 when he became a member of the National Order of Quebec. On behalf of the Bloc Québécois, I wish to offer very sincere condolences to his loved ones and the entire Innu Nation. Thank you for everything you've done for the Innu Nation. And thank you for continuing to make your voice heard from the beyond.
The honourable member from Calgary Skyview.
Mr. Speaker, Alberta is known for its economic success. With an increasingly diversified economy, Alberta businesses play a big role in keeping Canada's overall economy humming. For example, in my city of Calgary, we are investing in Exer to design and operate a pilot for an electronic waste recycling plant that sustainably converts electronic waste into precious metals. Meanwhile, at the University of Calgary, we are helping establish an aerospace innovation hub, which will help startups and existing small and medium-sized firms develop and test new aerospace technologies. Conservatives want us to stop supporting Alberta businesses and growing the prairie economy in a way that leaves no one behind.
I love the conservatives
That's not common
laughing
sense.
at that.
That's nonsense. Mr. Speaker, we will keep investing in Albertans.
The honourable member from Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Mr. Speaker, the cheapest, easiest way to save human lives is by installing and making available automated external defibrillators, or AEDs, and building the skills in the community that will make it possible for neighbours and family to use them quickly and efficiently. This was the conclusion reported in March by an all-party parliamentary group in the United Kingdom. They suggested a variety of policy changes that would lead to such things as defibrillators in newly constructed homes and buildings, training in the use of CPR and defibrillation as a part of driver's license testing, revising regulatory frameworks to streamline the introduction of new defibrillator technologies into the market, and putting defibrillators into all police vehicles in the country. Canada would profitably benefit from the establishment of a similar all-party parliamentary group with a similar mandate. And if we would take the simple and inexpensive step of putting an AED in every RCMP cruiser, we would save 300 lives per year starting now. Mr. Speaker, what are we waiting for?
The honourable member for Nickel Belt. Mr. Speaker, I am proud to represent the north of Ontario, a region that is stronger thanks to its francophone communities, its diversity, and its beautiful landscapes.
Nickel Belt.
FedNor plays a crucial role for municipalities and businesses throughout the region, big and small, so that they can all grow and succeed in French. FedNor's work with key partners, like the Association Canadienne Française de l'Ontario du Grand Sudbury, are protecting French in Nickel Belt, Grand Sudbury. On this side of the House, we support the federal development agencies because, unlike the Conservatives, we do not think a wall-to-wall Ottawa knows best approach is the best or is what people in the north of Ontario need. We support agencies like FedNor, and we've increased its funding. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Why does Bartis Striker have a backpack
The
on
honourable
like she's
member
going to
from
high school?
Cambridge.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to rise today to speak about the good work that our government is doing through the Economic Development Agency of Southern Ontario. I know that my colleagues on both sides of this House will agree that supporting small business and entrepreneurs leads to strong local and national economies.
She looks like she just
We're
got her
investing in
monthly pay.
EV suppliers and innovators like Arc Motors in Peterborough, which turns out vintage cars into EVs. Our main streets have the opportunity to thrive once again with investments in Main Street businesses. I've visited some fantastic businesses and met with entrepreneurs and organizations behind them. It is amazing to see innovation and growth that they are creating, Mr. Speaker. And I know that many business owners will be able to reach their potential and unlock new possibilities for Canada with support from FedDev Ontario. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Not under your government.
The honourable member from Caribou, Prince George.
Colleagues, in my province of British Columbia, overdose is now the leading cause of death for children aged 10 to 18. Think about that. This would have been unimaginable 9 years ago. Now it's a new norm. After unleashing a wave of crime, chaos, and death in our streets, the government's solution to the crisis is to hand out taxpayer-funded drugs like they're candy, flooding our streets with deadly opioids. So-called safe supply is key to the NDP Liberal drug legalization plan, but in reality it's anything but safe. New research reveals that 100% of British Columbians surveyed.
I hate to interrupt the honourable member. I'm going to ask all members, please, to keep their comments, statements by members are important.
Greg, what are you doing?
I'm going to ask the honourable member from Caribou, Prince George, to start his statement from the top.
Bravo.
Colleagues, in my province of British Columbia, overdose is now the leading cause of death for children 10 to 18. Think about that. This would have been unimaginable 9 years ago. Now it's the new norm. After unleashing a wave of crime, chaos, and death in our streets, the government's solution to the crisis is to hand out taxpayer-funded drugs like they're candy, flooding our streets with deadly opioids. So-called safe supply is key to the NDP Liberal drug legalization plan, but in reality, it's anything but safe. New research reveals that 100% of British Columbians surveyed are opposed to so-called safe supply. Even recovered addicts called the radical drug policy a failure, saying that if they had been offered safe supply rather than treatment, they would not have been able to overcome their addiction. If this Prime Minister refuses to put an end to his radical drug policies, he should step aside immediately and let common sense Conservatives invest in treatment and recovery.
The honourable member for Châteauguay-Lacolle. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government is investing in Quebec businesses through the Canada Economic Development for Quebec Regions Agency. Some examples. In Lévis-Lobinière, $101 million for J.L. Leclerc et Fils. In Bellechasse-Lévis, $1 million for Plat 2000 so that it can grow while reducing its ecological impact. In my colleague for Mégantic-Léraz riding, $2 million to help Fruits d'Or to increase their production of cranberries and blueberries in Quebec, or $1.5 million in Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord for Diffusion Saguenay for a new immersive show.
You are a blueberry.
The Conservatives want our economic development agencies to be a thing of the past. My Conservative colleagues from Quebec should be honest with businesses in the regions and tell them that they will be cutting investment.
The honourable member from Brantford, Brant.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal government is simply not worth the cost. The NDP leader blames everyone but himself, yet blindly supports the Prime Minister's inflationary deficits and policies that have driven up food prices for families. Canadians deserve to know the truth. Since he started holding hands with the Liberals in 2022, food prices have risen to a 40-year high. Perhaps it's because his brother's company is Metro's top lobbyist. Or is it because he voted to hike carbon taxes on families, farmers, and food? Either way, the NDP leader has sold out hungry families for his pension and power. Instead of selling out Canadians, common sense Conservatives will cut taxes, resulting in lower food prices and a stronger economy for all. Not just for those who drive a BMW or wear a Rolex. It's time for real Conservative leadership that puts families first.
The honourable member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, we're in a housing crisis and too many Quebecers do not know how they will be able to stay off the street. Today we learned in the Journal de Montréal that delays to get a construction permit have more than doubled in Montreal and in the region around Montreal. In fact, it can take up to 20 months to get a construction permit in downtown. People need housing now, not in nearly 2 years. Quebecers are struggling to pay the bills. Meanwhile, the Bloc Québécois voted for $50 billion in spending. This is centralizing spending that has caused inflation and the housing crisis that we're seeing right now. That is why the leader of our party tabled a common-sense plan to build housing, not red tape. Conservatives will offer financial support to municipalities that are building 15% more housing a year, like in the Saguenay. So I would ask the Prime Minister to allow his members to vote freely to help Quebecers keep a roof over their heads.
The honourable member from Labrador.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The northern economy is growing and diversifying. Through programs like the Economic Development Corps of Canmore and ACOA, investing in the north is helping businesses build on the strengths of northern people and their communities. Indigenous entrepreneurs and business owners are key drivers in the northern economy, and over half of Canmore's project funding goes to Indigenous-led projects across the territories. For example, in Labrador and Nunavut, we've invested over $3 million to support Inuit-led conservation and climate adaptation projects. This funding is empowering Inuit to research and observe changes to the land, water, and sea ice, as well as create opportunities for youth in their homeland. Mr. Speaker, those of us who live in rural communities in northern Canada, we know how important these programs are. Unlike the Conservatives who vote against these initiatives and programs, we continue to fund and support people.
Who's he waving at?
The honourable member from Victoria.
Today I want to recognize two disability rights champions in my community. Lemby Buchanan has worked for over 20 years to ensure that people living with severe mental health challenges receive the support they deserve. She's helped improve the application form for the disability tax credit to include thousands of people who were previously left behind. Joanne Neubauer passed away this year. She worked tirelessly for nearly 50 years to establish national policies and programs that emphasize justice and self-determination. As the founder for the Action Committee of Persons with Disabilities, Joanne lived her life with true compassion. May her legacy inspire us all to continue this important work. We need a disability benefit that will truly meet the needs of Canadians with disabilities, too many of whom are living well below the poverty line. We need legislation that removes barriers for people with disabilities. We must keep working to ensure they get the dignity and respect they deserve.
Yes.
Then I have
the honourable member for Laurentides-Labelle. Mr. Speaker, the Laurentides have their very own Mike Tyson, their very own Muhammad Ali. That is Vanessa Lepage-Joannis. On March 7th, Vanessa Lepage-Joannis became the WBC's world champion before a jubilant crowd at the Montreal Casino. After a setback at the World Championship in 2017, Vanessa hit the ring again. Her determination and fiery spirit should set an example for all of us. She works in a childcare center by day, taking care of our children, and then turns into a warrior by night. She proves that when you really try, you can make your dreams come true. without shame and with pride. We are all proud of you, Vanessa. And every time you step into the ring, all of the Laurentides will be cheering you on.
The honourable member from Peterborough, Kawartha.
There is no chance the housing minister will reach his housing target promises. That is a direct quote from Richard Lyle, president of the Residential Construction Council of Ontario. He testified yesterday in the Human Resources Committee and went on to say, "We are staring into a pit. What we are saying is that when cranes are coming down, they are not going back up." After 9 years of this Liberal NDP Prime Minister, housing costs have doubled, and yesterday's testimony from housing experts confirmed what Conservatives have been saying. The first-time home buyer is pretty much extinct, said Lyle. He said, "We effectively tax housing like alcohol and tobacco. It's like a sin tax. It doesn't make sense." Clearly, there is no chance that Prime Minister can or will help Canadians. It is time for common-sense Conservative policies where development fees are not the highest in the continent, and we restore the dream of home ownership.
Well done.
The honourable member from Ottawa West, Nepean.
Mr. Speaker,
Trudeau's in the House,
this week
Pierre's
marks
in the House.
the 25th anniversary of the arrival of the Kosovo refugees who fled the brutal conflict there in 1999. Today, the Canada-Kosovo Parliamentary Friendship Group welcomed a delegation from Kosovo to celebrate the occasion. 25 years after their arrival, we celebrate the invaluable contributions of Kosovo Canadians to our society. They are contributing as doctors, as business owners, members of the Canadian Armed Forces, music and cultural leaders, scientists, and so much more. The generosity of those Canadians who welcomed and helped them has been returned many times over. This anniversary serves as a reminder of our shared humanity and our duty of compassion toward those seeking refuge.
On this day, we will commit to continue supporting all those fleeing war and oppression. And we commit to honoring the stories of courage and resilience that can inspire us to be a more welcoming and inclusive society. Thank you.
All right, House is spelling up. Yeah, let's go.
Questions orales, oral questions. The Honourable Leader Donald.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Incompetence. The incompetence of this Prime Minister and the Liberal Mayor of Montreal is blocking construction and has led to a tripling of rent prices in Montreal. And we learnt, even worse today in La Presse, that it is a major hindrance in 2019. Obtaining permits, the time taken to obtain a permit has more than doubled. And the Prime Minister continues to spend $95 million for municipalities and mayors that are hindering construction. Why? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader's hypocrisy is clear. Let us talk about their proposal with regards to housing. And the Conservative leader has been ignoring debate on it for months. Their plan will not build enough rapid housing. It doesn't count enough cities and adds red tape. The Conservative leader would be ready to rip up 179 agreements for housing and reimpose GST on the construction of apartments. It's this lack of ambition in housing that have placed us in this situation. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
No wonder.
All the Prime Minister has said is false. When I was the Minister for Housing, we built 200,000 new housing units in Montreal. Average rent was $700 a month. $700 a month, Mr. Speaker. Now it's $2,000 a month. And the time one has to wait for a building permit has more than doubled. Why is the Prime Minister not following my common sense plan by giving money to the municipalities who are actually accelerating housing? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. What we see, Mr. Speaker, is that the Conservative leader is exploiting the fears of Canadians. when the Conservative leader was Minister for Housing, he withdrew from cooperative buildings. No new apartments were built, and initiatives were eviscerated for affordable housing. Today, his proposal for housing is insufficient. The leader of the Conservatives only has slogans and no actual concrete solutions.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Because of the incompetence of this Prime Minister and Liberal City Hall in Toronto, rent there has more than doubled over the last 9 years. What's worse is that the Prime Minister's so-called Housing Accelerator Fund has given $500 million to Toronto, and only months later, the politicians in that city hiked up home building taxes by 20%. Wow. Now 30% of all home building costs is government taxes alone. Why does the Prime Minister keep sending our money to build bureaucracies that block homes?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, we see the Conservative leader's hypocrisy on full display. Let's talk about their housing proposal, which the Conservative leader has been delaying debate on for months because he knows it's not ambitious enough. His proposal won't build homes fast enough, doesn't reach enough cities, and creates unnecessary bureaucracy. The Conservative leader would also rip up the 179 housing accelerator agreements and put the GST back on apartment construction. His clear lack of ambition on housing is partly how we ended up here in the first place.
Hear, hear.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay,
Honourable
buddy.
Leader of the Opposition.
When I was housing minister, we built 200,000 homes in 1 year. Rent was only $900, and mortgage payments were half of what they are today. Fast forward to present, the Prime Minister wants to has given $500 million to Toronto City Hall to jack up new taxes on home building. No wonder that when the president of the Residential Construction Council of Ontario, Richard Lyle, was asked whether the Prime Minister would keep his promise for 3.9 million new homes by the end of the decade, he said, and I quote, "No chance." Mr. Speaker, why doesn't he stop funding bureaucracy so that we can get out of the way and build homes?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
It is shameful, again, that the Conservative leader continues to exploit the very real anxieties of Canadians. When the Conservative leader was housing minister, let's talk about his record. He withdrew the government from cooperative housing. He supported the construction of 0 new apartments, and he gutted affordable housing initiatives and created new bureaucracies. His housing proposal today continues to fall short. The Conservative leader is simply all slogans and no answers.
That's right.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
My common sense plan to build the homes would reward municipalities that speed up permits and punish the politicians that get in the way. His approach has not only doubled housing costs, but he's built up Toronto City Hall with monstrous financial transfers so that they can block construction. Mr. Speaker, there have been 50 new tent encampments added in the City of Toronto in 6 weeks. Wow. There are 250 tent cities in Toronto alone. Is that his plan, to block homes and put up tents?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the so-called plan that the Conservative leader has put forward on housing does absolutely nothing to address homelessness or encampments. What we're actually investing in is hundreds of millions of dollars to help municipalities across the country build more housing rapidly, create the wraparound supports necessary to support people facing homelessness, and continue to be there on the most ambitious and comprehensive housing plan that this country has ever seen. This is part of what we're having to make up for the lost years in which he was housing minister 10 years ago, not creating housing for Canadians, not investing in our future.
Why does he sound like Dr. Evil when he says...
The Honourable Member for Baillieu-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, with regards to foreign interference, there was a report that talked of the elections of 2019 and 2021. It shows that there was a large deficit in coordination. It seems like the Prime Minister's office simply tried to sweep it under the rug. He admitted himself that he didn't read reports because he was not interested in them, which is not a good sign of leadership. How will the Prime Minister put an end to this complicity through inaction from his government? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, of course, we thank the National Agency for their diligent work. They put forward a number of recommendations upon which we are working. It is certain through our discussions on foreign interference, there were a number of challenges raised through matters such as internal communications through our intelligence agencies. We'll continue to implement recommendations and proposals that will improve the way that we respond as a government to foreign interference. The Honourable Member for Bélair-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, these aren't challenges. It's a monumental failure through ignorance and a lack of interest. To go even further in this direction, the Haut Commission has asked for information, but the Prime Minister's office literally withheld information and documents that the Commissioner had to fight to finally obtain. And it's the Commission that requested these documents. Will the Prime Minister promise his full collaboration and unconditional collaboration for this Commission from here on in? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as government, we shared with various investigative commissions more cabinet confidence than any government in the history of our country. We know how important it is to show Canadians that they can trust our public service structures in our intelligence bodies and in our government to counter foreign interference. And that is the reason for which we have shown ourselves to be transparent and open with the Commissioner, with all commissions. In fact, we will continue to show the work that we are doing as a government.
The Honourable Member from Burnaby South.
Okay, buddy. The hospital in Moose Factory was built nearly 70 years ago. The wood roof is caving in. There are no elevators. Patients and staff deserve better. For 2 decades, the community of James Bay has been pushing the federal government to build a new hospital. The Liberals promised funding, but in the last budget, there wasn't a single cent for the hospital. The province and Winnebago Area Health Authority are ready to go. Will the Prime Minister finally fund the new James Bay Hospital, yes or no?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, over the past years, we have made historic investments in First Nations and Indigenous healthcare right across the country. We recognize there is more to do. We're going to continue to be there as partners to Indigenous communities, to provincial health authorities, to making sure those investments show up for vulnerable Canadians from coast to coast to coast. We know how much more there is to do on the path to reconciliation, but we are there to be a partner every step of the way, and we'll continue to work to respond to the important needs of First Nations communities around healthcare.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Gives promise to the community and needs to build that hospital.
Yeah. Calm down there, Singh.
Public transit in Montreal is in crisis. Experts are clear. It's running out of money. And the longer this crisis lasts, the greater number of people will lose their public transit, and this government is doing absolutely nothing. The Liberals are abandoning Montrealers. What's the point of having Liberal MPs in Montreal if none of them are fighting for their city? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, rubbish. We have been here to invest in transit more than any previous government. And as a proud member from Montreal, our actions for the Blue Line, for the REM, our actions to continue investing in transit in Montreal, like is the case in Quebec City and throughout the country, will continue. We have implemented an infrastructure program to invest in a permanent and sustainable and recurrent way for decades to come in transit, and we'll continue to be here for Montreal, for Montrealers, for Quebecers and all Canadians when it comes to transit.
The Honourable Member from Kelowna Lake Country.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, Canada's housing crisis is only getting worse. The Liberals claim in Budget 2024 that they're going to build 3.87 million homes by 2031, and that would mean a new home completed every 57 seconds every day. At the Housing Committee, I asked Richard Lyle, a home building expert, if this was realistic, and he said, not a chance. The Prime Minister is not worth the cost of housing. Will this Prime Minister stop funding photo ops and start building the homes that Canadians desperately need?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, with the recent housing plan, we've set out to build the number of homes that's actually required to solve the housing crisis. With respect, Mr. Speaker, it's disappointing in the extreme that the Conservatives won't even set a goal that will solve the problem. What's more interesting, Mr. Speaker, is the member who posed the question actually had her community benefit with a $31.5 million investment to build more homes in Kelowna. She's advocating that that money is taken away from her city and be replaced by a program for which Kelowna is ineligible. Most MPs advocate for investments in their community. It's disappointing my colleagues doing the opposite.
The Honourable Member from Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it was announced just this morning that, in fact, housing starts are down in my community and also across the country. Wow. And in 2015, people could actually afford a home. 9 years of this NDP Liberal government has only brought us a housing crisis. And the head of the Residential Construction Council of Ontario said that construction is down there. And we are seeing this across the entire country. He said high financing costs and development charges means home builders are sitting at home instead of building homes. So since this Prime Minister has no meaningful plan, will the Liberals vote for our housing bill put forward by the Conservative opposition leader to build the homes, not bureaucracy?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, if she argues that housing starts in her community are down, why is her solution to cut funding for housing in her community? It's endemic to the Conservative approach. When you actually look at the plan that they put forward, it includes a tax hike on new apartment construction. It includes cuts to the programs that fund affordable housing, cuts to the programs that fund cities to build housing, cuts to the programs that allow young people to get into the market for the first time. The cuts are so extreme, even Conservative premiers are crying out, threatening to call snap elections in order to avoid the prospect of Conservative cuts. Cuts will not build homes.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member from Tobique-Mactaquac.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, Canadians are hungry and homeless. Yesterday it was confirmed at committee what Conservatives have been saying all along, that this housing minister will never meet his targets. In St. John, New Brunswick, the lack of housing options are leaving a family in a leaky, moldy apartment, and the father of 4, Corey Hamilton, is worried about the health and safety of his family. 10 new people a week are going homeless in Halifax in the minister's own backyard. Crazy. When will they stop funding photo ops and start building homes Canadians desperately need?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, even Conservative premiers recognize the damage these cost-cutting austerity Conservatives would wreak on our country. The only thing these Conservatives know how to do is cut, cut, cut. That's right. They want to cut the first home savings account that has allowed more than 750,000 young Canadians to save up for their first home. Sure. They want to cut support for infrastructure that is allowing municipalities to build homes. They want to tear Canada down, Mr. Speaker, but we won't let them.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member from Tobique-Mactaquac.
All this current federal Liberal government wants to do is blame, 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 and pass the buck. That non-answer will do absolutely nothing for the Hamilton family in St. John who are in desperate need of alternatives for housing. Since the Prime Minister has no plan and the Liberals have no chance tomorrow to build the homes, and all they're wanting to do is continue to build the bureaucracy, why don't they give all of their members a chance to vote freely on this Conservative leader's plan for housing? Let's do that tomorrow. A free vote.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Order. À l'ordre, s'il vous plaît. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, it is not only Conservative premiers who understand the terrible damage Conservative cuts would do to our country. Canada's mayors get it too.
That's right.
And that's why it was so shameful to hear the progressive mayors of two great Canadian cities, Toronto and Montreal, be vilified by the Conservative leader today. We believe in working with our municipal partners and our provincial ones. That's how we build Canada.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the cat's out of the bag after 9 years of inflationary spending supported by the Bloc, which tripled the cost of housing in Montreal. A detailed report in La Presse today confirms that the time it takes to obtain a building permit in Montreal is interminable. It takes 540 days to build a home in the mayor's own borough of Ville-Marie. 540 days. Will the Prime Minister stop rewarding bureaucratic incompetence and instead reward municipalities that actually speed up housing construction, as proposed by the Leader of the Opposition's Common Sense Bill? The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities. Mr. Speaker, it's incredible. The member is asking a question about housing. But the Leader of the Opposition will table a bill that will cut measures for affordable housing, that will cut measures that will support communities that build housing, that will cut measures that will support individuals who buy their first home. The problem with the Conservatives is that they're not a good thing for Canadians. They're a disaster. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. You know what happens with this housing minister's measures? After 9 years, more and more Quebecers are living in tents in Montreal because of this minister's and the Prime Minister's incompetence. Will the Prime Minister accept our common sense plan for Canada and Quebec to sign a common sense agreement to encourage housing construction in Montreal? An agreement that will give a bonus to competent municipalities and punish municipalities that don't build housing. Will the Prime Minister at least allow his MPs a free vote to support the bill to build housing and not build red tape? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement.
Oh, this guy's going to say
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague speaks about building housing. Mr. Speaker, do you know how the Conservative leader, how much the Conservative leader built when he was a housing minister? He built 6 entire affordable housing units during his entire mandate.
He smirks when he does it too. That's all this guy ever says.
Quebec municipalities are building 8,000 right now with the support of the Canadian government. So let's compare Quebec's apparently incompetent municipalities with the Conservative leader's own record. The Honourable Member for La Pointe de l'Île.
Really all that guy ever
Let's talk about the report by the Office québécois de la langue française. The federal public administration is the worst economic sector in Quebec when it comes to being able to use French in the workplace. Yesterday, we asked the Commissioner for Official Languages about this. He reminded us that complaints about the language of work have not gone down this year. They've actually gone up. It's in the Gatineau-Ottawa region that the number of complaints are the highest, at the very heart of the federal apparatus. When will the Liberals stop their federal administration from becoming an Anglicization machine? The Honourable President of the Treasury Board. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's simply not true. We know that that it's through a bilingual public service that we'll be able to serve Canadians. Canadians can obtain service in their official language of their choice. That is a fundamental aspect of our public service, and so we will continue to protect and promote French, and we are determined to promote a working environment that is conducive to the use of French and English, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for La Pointe de l'Île. If the federal government is Quebec's worst employer when it comes to being able to use French, it's because of a lack of Liberal political will. With the reform of the Official Languages Act, the Liberals were supposed to impose a regulatory framework to force equality between French and English in federal institutions. Well, We're still waiting, Mr. Speaker. To quote the Commissioner for Official Languages yesterday, we need renewed commitment, and that starts with leadership from federal ministers. So when will we see a regulatory framework and actual leadership from ministers?
This guy just, that's all the Bloc ever talks
President
about
of the
is
Treasury
French
Board.
language. Or that they want money.
Mr. Speaker, I've also spoken with the Commissioner, and I've spoken to him and to all stakeholders in our government and in our country. As President of the Treasury Board, I have made commitments in the implementation of Parts 4, 5, 6 of the OLA as regards to the federal public service. It's a very important work. As I said, we are determined to continuing the use of French and English in the federal public workplace. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, we'll take no lessons from the Liberals. The Liberals are far too easy to identify. They keep saying we have to protect French, yet the federal government is the worst employer in Quebec when it comes to French in the workplace. Are they tightening the screws on their own administration to put a stop to this? No. Are they regulating the force equality between English and French in federal institutions? No. Do they set an example by insisting on mastery of French in their own appointments, like for the Governor-General? No. The worst examples come from the top. Does the government agree that we need to actually have a healthy head of country and healthy head of government? The Honourable President of the Treasury Board. Mr. Speaker, look at me. I'm an Anglophone, but I speak French. What's he talking about? I can speak French in this House of Commons, and I can speak French with all public servants, in French and in English, and I will continue to try and implement Parts 4, 5, and 6 of the Official Languages Act. And that is my responsibility and our priority, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Foothills.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the homelessness or the hunger. The Carbon Tax Coalition increased the carbon tax 23%, driving grocery prices up $700 per family, and a quarter of Canadians are relying on food banks. They can't afford the basic necessities, let alone a summer vacation. Conservatives have a common sense plan to eliminate all federal gas taxes until Labor Day. This will save Alberta families $955. Will the Prime Minister follow our common sense plan, eliminate the federal gas tax so families can afford a summer holiday?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Mr. Speaker, I find this question very disingenuous. We will take no lessons from the Conservatives when it comes to food bank usage, when they refuse and they vote against providing food to hungry kids at school.
The Honourable Member from Foothills.
Out of touch is a Liberal NDP government that listens to bankers and bondholders that benefit from Liberal inflation. I'm listening to my constituents. Constituents like Lisa, who showed me her carbon tax rebate. It was $15. What a joke. It's not a joke for Foothills families who pay $3,000 a year in carbon taxes, have nothing left for food or homes, let alone a summer vacation. The Parliamentary Budget Officer is clear. Canadians pay more in the carbon tax than they get back in a rebate. Will the Prime Minister axe all federal gas tax this summer so Lisa could take her family for a summer road trip?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives are the party of austerity.
That's right.
The only thing they know how to do is cut, cut, cut. And so it is no surprise that they want to cut the carbon rebates that leave 8 out of 10 Canadian families better off. And you know what else they want to cut? They want to cut the National School Food Program. They want to cut early learning and child care. Yep. They want to cut dental care that already 2 million Canadians are benefiting from. Right. They want to tear Canada down, but we won't let them.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member from Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the hunger and homelessness. Alan and Willa, seniors from Melbourne who've worked their whole lives, have told me that they can't even afford a small fall vacation because everything is too expensive. Conservatives are calling on the government to axe the tax this summer, saving Ontario families nearly $600 to help pay for food and housing and maybe a small family vacation. So will the Prime Minister adopt our common sense plan to axe the tax on gas this summer so Canadians can afford a summer road trip?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said a number of times in this House, it would be useful if the Conservative Party of Canada actually used facts to inform the questions that they ask. 8 out of 10 Canadian families get more money back. 300 Canadian economists have said so. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has said so. It actually works in reverse to income, so it's people who actually live on the most modest income that get the most money back, and it's part of fixing the climate crisis that threatens the future of our children. The group across the way has no plan for affordability, and their plan for climate is to simply let the planet burn.
The Honourable Member from Lambton Kent, Middlesex.
What we just heard that answer from the NDP Liberal government is that they want Canadians like Alan and Willa to be poor and miserable. Canadians deserve a break. They work hard, they pay their taxes, and how does this government repay them? They increase the carbon tax by 23%. So I'll ask the question again. Will the Prime Minister adopt our common sense plan to axe the tax on gas this summer so Canadians can afford a summer vacation?
During the honourable member's question, there was a lot of discussion going on, nothing too radical. I'd ask members please to keep their voices down so that we could all hear the questions and hear the answer. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, even Conservative premiers understand the absolute carnage that Conservative cuts would cause across our country. They understand that the only thing Conservatives want to do is cut the support Canadians urgently need. They want to cut the National School Food Program. 400,000 kids are going to benefit from that. They want to cut dental care. 2 million Canadians already benefiting from it. And of course, they want to cut early learning and childcare. We won't let them do any of that.
The Honourable Member from Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Flight attendants, who are predominantly women, work on average 35 hours a month unpaid. No worker should have to do their job without a paycheck. But the Liberals and the Conservatives have let the big airline CEOs get away with it. The Liberals have even given these airlines millions in handouts. And recently, the Liberals told flight attendants that they should simply file complaints with those same CEOs who are ripping them off. Why are the Liberals putting the burden on workers instead of holding profitable CEOs to account?
Yes.
The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Members are aware Canadian Airlines are private sector companies. The government does not regulate wages in companies aside from setting a minimum wage. Employers must pay their workers no less than the minimum wage for all hours of work performed, which is protected under the Canada Labour Code. This is an issue we take very seriously, and we are monitoring it closely. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, they're monitoring.
The Honourable Member from Skeena, Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, people with disabilities are still waiting for this government to protect their dignity and their safety when they travel with Canadian Airlines. We've heard story after story about people being injured, mobility aids being broken or lost. And the Liberals' response? They held a summit where there was yet again more talk and very little action. The only announcement from the summit was the airlines earnestly promising to do better in the future. The minister can do more than simply ask politely. He can lay down the law and set proper rules. Why does he refuse to?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, our government is firm in supporting persons with disabilities, be they traveling from point A to point B, by air, by land, by sea, by all means of transport. And that's why we held a disability summit, gathering together the airlines industry and persons with disabilities to sharpen our pencils to make sure that persons with disabilities can travel with dignity. We are doing this work. We're making sure that Canadians can travel in dignified fashion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good answer.
The Honourable Member from Halifax West.
We have
an abundance of talent in Atlantic Canada's colleges and universities. The cutting-edge research and innovation produced in my region strengthens Canada's competitive advantage and drives growth in key industries like manufacturing, clean energy, and ocean sustainability. Can the minister responsible for ACOA tell the House what our government is doing to support researchers and entrepreneurs fueling East Coast innovation?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister of Regional Economic Development in ACOA.
Mr. Speaker, Atlantic Canada is just full of bright thinkers and doers, and at ACOA, the past few years we've invested $30 million in Springboard Atlantic to get ideas from the classroom to the boardroom. Springboard has turned that funding into $500 million in partnerships. We know ACOA investments bring long-term benefits to our communities, and yet the member from New Brunswick Southwest wrote in the National Post that ACOA and the other regional economic development agencies should be shut down. I wonder, do the other 7 Atlantic Conservatives agree with them? Will they stand up for our region and support the work of ACOA? Let's hope they have a backbone. We do, Mr. Speaker.
You have no backbone.
The Honourable Member from Cumberland Colchester.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the hunger or the homelessness. The pain of their financial mismanagement is coming home to roost in my hometown, where they came to visit. But what they didn't know is the Colchester Food Bank is serving 148 more households than they did the year before. These are real people, not statistics, and they deserve better. I asked this question on Friday. Didn't really get much of an answer, but maybe I'll get one today. When will the Prime Minister axe the tax so Canadians can afford to eat again?
The Honourable Member for Families.
Mr. Speaker, we all suffer when we see fellow Canadians suffering, which is why we set concrete poverty reduction targets, a target to reduce poverty by 50% by 2030. There are 1.3 million fewer Canadians living in poverty today than there were when the Conservatives were in government, and this includes hundreds of thousands of children. That said, more work needs to be done, which is exactly why Budget 2024 brings forward additional measures to strengthen our social security net.
The Honourable Member from Cumberland Colchester.
Speaker, the member the opposite is avoiding the question, and the answer shows us just how much we need a significant change in government. The CBC reported last week that seniors in Louisbourg, Nova Scotia, have been going days and even weeks without a proper meal, and that some children are not attending school because they don't have any food to take for lunch. Canadians are hurting, and their government just doesn't seem to care. Again, when will the Prime Minister axe the tax so Canadians can afford to feed themselves?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, it is the height of hypocrisy for Conservatives to claim that they care about the most vulnerable among us.
That's right.
Let's talk about seniors, Mr. Speaker. 900,000 seniors across the country are benefiting from the GIS put in place by our government. And children in school, I agree that it is a tragedy for a kid to go to school hungry, and that's why our national school food program will provide meals for an additional 400,000 children. They are opposed to both. We take no lessons from them when it comes to food.
The Honourable Member from Chatham-Kent, Leamington.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the hunger and or homelessness. Food Banks Canada gives Canada failing grades as nearly half of Canadians are financially feeling the cost of living increases. Housing costs have doubled. 1 in 4 experience food insecurity. Food bank usage is up 11% in Windsor-Essex. 61% of Canadians are using food banks, and they're the first-time users. Mr. Speaker, we believe in bringing it home. The tragedy of this government is that there are people who can't afford a home, let alone food to put into it. Is this the sunny ways that this Prime Minister promised Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, of course, we know, Mr. Speaker, that when the Conservatives had the opportunity to be in government, they focused no attention on those that were homeless or vulnerable. We have not only met our targets every year to reduce poverty, but have taken important action. What the Conservatives essentially are saying is, in tough global times, we're here for you to cut your dental care. We're here for you to cut your diabetes medication. We're here for you to cut your child care. We're here for you to cut the supports that you need in difficult economic times. Canadians will see through that. They know who has their back.
The honourable member from Moose Jaw Lake Centre, Lanigan.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the hunger or the homelessness. Nearly half of Canadians are paying more than a third of their paycheck on food. The Moose Jaw Food Bank helped nearly 8,000 households in 2023,
Minister of Gender and
58%.
Inclusion and,
It's time to give Canadians back their dignity. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister axe the tax, or will it take a common-sense Conservative government before Canadians can afford to eat?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we will take no lessons from these Conservatives when it comes to supporting the most vulnerable among us. Since we formed government, 1.3 million Canadians have been lifted out of poverty, including hundreds of thousands of children. But we recognize these are very challenging times in Canada and around the world. And that is why we are so glad to be putting in place a national school food program. 400,000 kids will get meals because of it. How can the Conservatives vote against that? You know how? Because they only believe in cuts and austerity.
That's right.
Yeah, cut the carbon tax so
the honourable member for Lac Saint Jean.
Themselves.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday, the Minister of Immigration was asked about the distribution of asylum seekers. He replied that we were confusing reception capacity with willingness to receive. I'd like to remind him that Quebec has opened the equivalent of more than 50 schools with reception classes for refugee children this year. Now that's willingness. In the meantime, Ottawa is not spreading out asylum seekers or reimbursing the costs, and we see families sleeping outside for lack of accommodation. This is a problem of will. When is the minister going to solve his resolve issue and take action? The Honourable Minister of Immigration. First, I'd like to underscore the participation of the Bloc in terms of immigration. We're wondering why they haven't increased their capacity for several years, and the responsibility is shared between Quebec and Canada. That's what we've announced for weeks we're going to do, and we're going to see results, but this is a positive development in our relationship. The Honourable Member for Lac Saint Jean. With such comments, it's easy to understand why Ottawa has been sleeping on the issue of asylum seekers for months. If the minister still thinks that it's a question of will and not of capacity, he really hasn't understood a thing. Meanwhile, there are people lining up at food banks. There are people with no place to stay. There are schools that were already short of resources and now don't know what to do today. When is the minister going to understand that there are people who are at the end of the rope, and that there are people who can't take it anymore because the actions of his government? The Honourable Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. Mr. Speaker, I think that Quebecers and Canadians would agree with me by saying that $5.2 billion transferred to Quebec under the Canada-Quebec agreement is action. We're always ready to do more. It's also very clear that Canada, like many other countries, is facing an irregular migration issue, but we can meet up to this challenge with our provinces and territories as partners.
From Fort McMurray, Cold Lake.
Like you don't regulate it. That's not your job.
After 9 years, it is clear NDP Liberal extremist drug policies have been a complete failure. Something everybody seems to understand except this NDP Liberal government. 100% of people recently polled were opposed to these dangerous drug policies that are flooding our streets with potent drugs. I quote, all believe this was a step in the wrong direction. What will it take for this Prime Minister to cancel his deadly and dangerous taxpayer-funded drug trafficking experiment?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Mr. Speaker, the member well knows that first and foremost, diversion is illegal in this country of any narcotics. Doesn't matter what they're for, ADHD, methamphetamines, or anything else of the sort. When it comes to prescribed alternatives, Mr. Speaker, it is one tool of many to combat the overdose crisis in this country, to save lives, Mr. Speaker. They choose an either-or and a war on drugs policy that will leave people dead in the streets rather than getting them to health care. Shame on them, Mr. Speaker.
That's not what she asked.
The Honourable Member from Fort McMurray, Cold Lake.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, the only thing that's dropped in price has been the price of hydromorphone, which, by the way, the street price has gone from $20 a pill to $2 a pill under their watch because of the diversion they have allowed. Police sounded the alarm, sharing that 50% of hydromorphone that they've seized has been from diverted taxpayer-funded drug trafficking schemes, flooding the streets with potent drugs and fueling new addiction. So the question is simple: when will they put an end to this dangerous program?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Mr. Speaker, I will say it again. Diversion is illegal in this country. And not only that, Mr. Speaker, Conservatives are trying to portray the fiction of our streets rather than the reality. The RCMP made it explicitly clear of what is happening with regards to diversion, and the numbers you're quoting are simply not fact. The facts are this: data shows that there's no increase of hydromorphone in the past decade from drug seizures across Canada. Mr. Speaker, we are talking about saving lives. Where are they?
The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg-Haut-Saint-Charles. We have learned in the Journal de Montréal that there are people using drugs in the streets near an elementary school in the Saint-Henri district of Montreal.
That's
Parents are having to step over people using drugs on the street and are traumatized and worried for their children. This situation is escalating across Canada. Can the Prime Minister confirm that he will not listen to demands of the City of Montreal to legalize the use of hard drugs in public spaces? The Honourable Minister.
Yet again, the Conservatives want to play games with the lives of people who need health care. It's shameful, Mr. Speaker. Decriminalization is about personal possession. It has nothing to do with the control of substances in this country. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, people need prevention. They need harm reduction, which they refuse to acknowledge. They need health care. Stop criminalizing our loved ones and get them into health services.
The Honourable Member for Pontiac. Mr. Speaker, development agencies in Quebec are very important in Quebec, and they contribute to growth, productivity, and innovation of our Quebec businesses. And that is why I'm somewhat upset with my Conservative colleagues from New Brunswick. They're saying that these agencies hamper local economies. Can the Minister of Economic Development reassure Canadians and tell us how our government is going to continue to invest in Quebec's economic growth? The Honourable Minister responsible for economic development. I'd like to thank my colleague for her question. I'm very concerned to know that Conservatives in Quebec are telling their colleagues from New Brunswick that they want to get rid of these regional development agencies. For every dollar invested, it's $4 investment that is generated. We think we have to invest in economic growth, in job creation, but they just want to cut, Mr. Speaker. Provincial Conservatives are terrified by their austerity plans.
Thornhill.
After 9 years of this Liberal NDP government, their catch-and-release policies have gotten so bad that they are allowing criminal organizations to operate freely in the streets. Even after a 7-month investigation involving 26 arrests and $33 million of stolen vehicles, at least 14 people are already out on bail. Wow. The police worked for months to catch these criminals, and days later, a broken system lets them free. When will they finally do the right thing and keep career criminals in jail so that Canadians can keep their cars?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Start by saluting the impressive work of the Peel Police Force for cracking an organized criminal ring that is taking people's cards. But the second thing I want to underscore for that member and her entire caucus is that you can't selectively listen to law enforcement. What law enforcement tells me and the Minister of Public Safety all the time is that the days of teenage joyrides are over. This is an international organized criminal effort. We need to deal with that and follow the money path. How are we doing that? Anti-money laundering offenses, beefing up our strength on money laundering through the fall economic statement and the budget. Two things they are voting against.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
Speaker, it's that minister's policy that is working against the Peel Police. And this is coming from a guy that in his ministry had 3 cars stolen in 3 years. The evidence is right on his doorstep. The Liberal catch and release policies are not working. After 9 years of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister, the GTA doesn't stand for Greater Toronto Area. It stands for Grand Theft Auto. 40 cars stolen a day in Toronto, 20 in Peel. How many more is it going to take for him to do something about it?
I like that. GTA doesn't stand for the Greater Toronto Area. It stands for Grand Theft Auto.
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
In the last 3 months, we've held an auto theft summit. We've invested $170 million in addressing this issue through investments in law enforcement, through investments in CBSA scanners, through investing in information sharing through Interpol. What we're doing is working diligently to break up criminal networks. We're not pursuing failed policies like the Conservatives' approach year after year under Stephen Harper, most of which were struck down by the Supreme Court of Canada.
The Honourable Member from Oxford.
Speaker, after 9 years of this Liberal NDP government's soft-on-crime policies, extortions have more than tripled in Canada. They allow criminals to terrorize our communities and our businesses because when they get arrested, they're let out on bail the same day. The Liberals talk a very big game about fighting crime, but when it matters, they're missing from action. Our common-sense Conservative bill would have put these criminals behind bars by strengthening our extortion laws. Why did these Liberals vote against Bill 381 to fight extortion?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we're listening to people that are affected by extortion. We know this is a pressing problem in parts of BC and in parts of my region in Ontario. What we are underscoring is that extortion is against the law. Extortion with
Going to ask the Honourable Member from Peace River, Northern Rockies, and I'm forgetting one of the 2 words of that, to please to keep his comments to himself. I'll also ask the Honourable Member from Cypress Hills Grasslands, please, to keep his comments until he has the floor. I'm going to ask the Honourable Minister to start again and start from the top.
Mr. Speaker, we are listening constantly to communities that are being affected by extortion, particularly South Asians in the BC region and in the GTA. And what we hear from them is that they need supports. We are providing those supports through aggressive responses under the criminal code. Extortion is against the law. Extortion with a weapon attracts a very significant penalty under Canadian criminal law. What we also understand from them is that organized criminality, including foreign interference and organized criminality, is behind these extortion attempts. That's why bills like C-70 will make an important difference. So will the budget measures on money laundering and cracking down on organized crime.
The Honourable Member from Winnipeg South Centre.
Mr. Speaker, with an energy grid that is 97% clean, a strong manufacturing and agricultural sector, and a diverse population, Manitoba is a key economic driver for Canada. In order to help realize our potential, we rely on the strengths of Prairie Can, our regional development agency. Some members of the opposition have suggested that investments in Prairie Can are not worthwhile. Can the Minister of Prairie Economic Development please inform us of the important role that the agency plays in supporting the Prairie region? Thank you. Good question.
The Honourable Minister.
Speaker, no matter where I go in the prairies, the great work done by Prairie Can is greatly appreciated. Prairie Can created or maintained over 150,000 jobs in over 6,300 businesses. Whether it's better positioning hydrogen in Edmonton, supporting work done by the Saskatchewan Research Council in Saskatoon, or helping New Flyers build net zero buses in Winnipeg, Prairie Can is making necessary investments in prairie businesses to help grow our economy. If Conservatives understood this important work, they wouldn't be calling to abolish it. Mr. Speaker, it's simply shameful.
The honourable member from Vancouver East.
Successive Liberal and Conservative governments have heavily relied on migrant workers to support Canada's economy. They're often underpaid and racialized. They can easily fall through the cracks, leaving them undocumented through no fault of their own. They live here and contribute to our communities, and they pay their taxes. Yet without permanent status, they're often subject to exploitation and abuse. The Liberals say they want to regularize them since 2021, but empty words won't protect workers. Will the Prime Minister implement a broad, uncapped program to regularize undocumented workers so that their basic human rights are protected? Yes.
The Honourable Minister for Immigration, Refugees and...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate and respect the member's passion in this matter, particularly for a set of people that indeed are in Canada, are subject to abuse at times, and there should be regular pathways for people that are here irregularly. I can confirm to this House that pursuant to the Minister's mandate letter, we are looking at a number of options. I would say to all Canadians that there is no clear consensus as to the path forward, but as this is work that is ongoing, I cannot comment any further. Thank you.
The honourable member from Timmins, James Bay.
Fire season is on us, and yet oil production of the tar sands has reached its highest peak ever. That's thanks to this Liberal government's $34 billion to the TMX pipeline. Now we learn Big Oil is planning a 400-kilometer pipeline along the Athabasca River, and they want to be exempt from a federal environmental assessment. And this government has signed a non-disclosure agreement with Pathways Alliance to keep details of this project secret. The planet is on fire. Why is the Environment Minister continuing to act like a sock puppet for big oil CEOs?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, I've been very clear. There will be no special pathway for the Pathways project. If that project is subject to Federal Impact Assessment Act, it will be evaluated as other federal projects are evaluated, and there will be no special cases made for that project, Mr. Speaker.
I'd like to draw the attention of members in the presence of the gallery of Her Excellency Danica Gurvala Schwartz, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs and Diaspora of the Republic of Kosovo.
All right, well, that's pretty much it for question period then. Tomorrow, I think we get Trudeau again. And right after this, I'm pretty sure they're going to do a vote to kick the Speaker.
It being 3:15 p.m., the House will now proceed to the taking of the deferred report
and there's also some good committees I'm going to put out in like half an hour. There's like some really funny ones this morning.
Bill C-59.
Cheers everyone for being here, and I'll see you tomorrow live.